Welcome to the Belly Button Window channel, where we tell the Jimi Hendrix story like you've never heard it before. In this episode, part 3 of the series, we continue the definitive review, commentary and discussion about one of the greatest albums ever recorded, Electric Ladyland, by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Please remember to check the channel's community tab and video information page, where you will find links to the Belly Button shop, including our catalogue of videos, Hendrix merchandise, and links to Jimi's performances and information from the period. With Voodoo Child's slight return, Jimi carries on the images of unlimited power transcending the laws of nature, started with his Delta Blues-inspired Voodoo Child, which was the opening track for the album. The day after recording Voodoo Child, Hendrix, with Mitchell and Noel returned to the studio for the filming of a short documentary. Rather than repeat what had been recorded the day before, they improvised, using some of the same imagery and guitar lines. As Noel recalled, "We learned that song in the studio. They had the cameras rolling on us as we played it." The song became Voodoo Child's Slight Return, one of Hendrix's signature songs, and one that has been covered by numerous artists. Hendrix added, "Someone was filming when we started doing Voodoo Child. We did that about 3 times because they wanted to film us in the studio, to make it look like you're recording, boys. One of them scenes, you know. So, okay, let's play this in E, a 1, a 2, a 3, and then we went into Voodoo Child." According to Hendrix biographer Stephen Roby, 8 takes of the song were recorded by Hendrix, Redding, and Mitchell, and the final one was chosen as the master, which appeared on the Electric Ladyland album. Voodoo Child's Slight Return is one of Hendrix's best-known songs and was a feature of his concert performances throughout his subsequent career, and several live renditions were recorded and released on later albums. After Hendrix's death in 1970, Track Records released the song as a single in the United Kingdom. It became Hendrix's only #1 single on the UK singles chart, reaching the top position during the week of November 15, 1970. Since then, several artists have performed or recorded versions of the song. While Rolling Stone magazine included it at number 101 on their original 2004 list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. Author Charles Shaar Murray examines Hendrix's use of the term Voodoo Child in his book Crosstown Traffic and states, "Voodoo symbolism and reference resound through the country blues and through the urbanized electric country blues of the Chicago school. In Hendrix's case, this is pure metaphor. He certainly was not a voodoo initiate in any formal sense, both with Voodoo Child and, most specifically, with the West African, even before Bo Diddley beat, he percussively scratches from his guitar and wah-wah pedal at the beginning of Voodoo Child's Slight Return. He is announcing as explicitly as possible that he is a man of the blues, and one who honors, respects, and understands its deepest and most profound traditions. Except for the chorus, the lyrics of Voodoo Child's Slight Return are different from Voodoo Child. Well, I stand up next to a mountain and I chop it down with the edge of my hand 2 times. Well, I pick up all the pieces and make an island, might even raise just a little sand. 'Cause I'm a voodoo child, Lord knows I'm a voodoo child." Voodoo Child's Slight Return became a staple of Hendrix's concert performances, varying in length from 7 to 18 minutes. Recordings from the Winterland Ballroom, Royal Albert Hall, Woodstock, and the Fillmore East were later released on the Jimi Hendrix concerts, Hendrix in the West, Woodstock, and Live at the Fillmore East. An AllMusic reviewer described the song as a perfect example of how Hendrix took the Delta blues form and not only psychedelicized it, but cast an even more powerful spell by delivering the lyric in the voice of a voodoo priest. Also noted is Hendrix's guitar work. Opening with a simple riff on the wah-wah pedal, the song explodes into full sonic force, the guitarist hitting the crunching chords and taking the astral-inspired leads for which he became infamous. The real guitar explorations happen midway through the song, while the basic, thundering riff is unrelenting. While Joe Satriani said of the song, "It's just the greatest piece of electric guitar work ever recorded." In fact, the whole song could be considered the holy grail of guitar expression and technique. It is a beacon of humanity. Rolling Stone magazine included the song at number 102 on their list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. Stevie Ray Vaughan recorded Voodoo Child's Slight Return for his second album, Couldn't Stand the Weather, in 1984, and commented in a 1985 interview, "I love Hendrix's music, and I just feel it's important for people to hear him. Although he follows Hendrix's original, he still manages to make it his own," according to Far Out magazine contributor Sam Kemp. Guitar World's Damien Finelli adds, "Vaughan's uncanny ability to smooth out some of Hendrix's weirder edges without losing any of the music's power or excitement allowed him to credibly deliver Jimi's avant-garde blues to a whole new generation of guitar fanatics." Vaughan often performed the song in concert, and recorded versions are included on various albums. About the Electric Ladyland album, "I wanted to make Electric Ladyland a double LP, but it was a big hassle. The record producer and the companies don't want to do that. I'd be willing to spend every single penny on it if I thought it was good enough. Well, I'll do that and then they'll leave me out there. The reason I wanted this as a double LP is because we had so many good songs. I don't know if they're commercially good, but time was going by and our sound was changing, and there were these songs that you haven't ever heard. If you put out a single LP and then wait 6 months for another single, it's going to be out of style. We're trying to give as much of us from 6 months back to now as we can, because we're constantly evolving. Electric Ladyland is different to anything we've ever done before. It's slightly electric funk every once in a while, and it goes into complete opposite on some songs, complete fantasy. There are other sides of you, and sometimes they leak out on the records too. Like you tell them something hard, but you don't want to be a completely hard character in their minds. That's where the fantasy songs come in." He goes on to say, "People think you don't know what you're talking about, but it all depends on what the tracks before and after might have been. The record wasn't just slapped together. Every little thing you hear on there means something. I don't say it's great, but it's the experience. It has a rough, hard feel on some tracks. It's part of us, another part of us. Some groupies know more about the music than the guys. Some people call them groupies, but I prefer the term electric ladies. My whole Electric Ladyland album is about them. It starts with a 90-second sound painting of the heavens. It's typifying what happens when the gods make love, or whatever they spend their time on. I know it's the thing that people will jump on and criticize, so we're putting it right at the beginning to get it over with." On writing songs, the way I write things, they are just a clash between reality and fantasy. You have to use fantasy to show different sides of reality. It's not a little game we're playing, trying to blow the public's mind and so forth. For instance, 1983 is something to keep your mind off what's happening today, but not necessarily hiding away from it, like some people might do with certain drugs and so forth. On some tracks you hear all this clash and bang and fanciness, but all we're doing is laying down the guitar tracks, and then we echo here and there. We might have the drums or guitar swing around to the other side with the echo going the other way, what you call pan the echo. We're using the same things anyone else would, but we use them with imagination and common sense. In House Burning Down, we made the guitar sound like it was on fire. It's constantly changing a dimension, and up on top, that lead guitar is cutting through everything. For the record's benefit, we just try to take you somewhere, as far as the record can go. On Voodoo Child, we just opened the studio up, and all our friends came down after jam sessions. Steve Winwood is on one track. Al Cooper is on another, but his piano is almost drowned out. It just happened that way, so the piano is there to be felt, not heard. A lot of my songs happen on the spur of the moment. I start with a few notes scribbled on some paper, and then we get to the studios, the melody is worked out, and lots of guys all kick in little sounds of their own. It's satisfying working this way. We don't want anything too carefully planned. We did Voodoo Child's Slight Return about 3 times because they wanted to film us in the studio. Make it look like you're recording, boys. One of those scenes, you know. So, okay, let's put this in E. Now a 1 and a 2 and a 3. And then we went into it. Except for Watchtower and Burning of the Midnight Lamp, it was all recorded at the Record Plant Studios in New York. Watchtower comes from British Sessions and was recorded as a single. It's our own arrangement. We use the solo guitar as different types of sounds, a slide, then wah-wah, and then straight. You just don't do everybody's songs, and if you're going to do them, you don't necessarily have to copy them. Noel kicked in one of the songs. Mitch and he are singing this English rock type thing called Little Miss Strange, but mostly they're mine. On singing and Dylan. In the early days, I used to ask the producer to drown my voice in the backing track. I thought it was so bad, but I was basing my assessment of my voice on the wrong things. Now, I base my singing on real feelings and true thoughts. I learned that from listening to Dylan. Dylan has a lousy voice technically, but he's good because he sings things he believes in. true feeling are really the only qualities worth listening to in a voice. I felt like All Along the Watchtower was something I'd written, but could never get together. I often feel like that about Dylan. Every time I perform his Rolling Stone, it makes me feel so good, as though I had taken something off my mind. Mitch Mitchell recalled, "The bulk of the recording from then on took place at the record plant in New York. We went there because Gary Kellegran, who we'd worked with at Mayfair, had raised the money with a partner and managed to start the record plant. I guess we started there specifically to work on Electric Ladyland around the middle of April 1968, after the first half of the tour with the Soft Machine had finished. We block-booked the studio through the night. The usual thing was that late in the evening we'd go down to the scene to play and hang out, and then go round to the studio, which was only a couple of blocks away. Huge amounts of money were spent, not just on studio time, but in stupid things like having limos on call the whole time. We'd have them waiting around outside the scene for hours to take us and all our friends and anything that moved 2 blocks down the street. The security at the record plant wasn't terribly good, and Hendrix would turn up with endless streams of people, so to get any kind of work done was really difficult. Looking back, it was amazing that the album was finished. In the end, the bulk of it got done in about a month, although at the time it seemed to take forever. Not just the album tracks, there were loads of outtakes that are now surfacing as well. Mostly I did enjoy working on it, things like Voodoo Child, with Jack Cassidy on bass plus Steve Winwood and Chris Wood, were great. People liked to make out that we were all playing at the scene and it was, "Hey, let's take this down to the studio." It wasn't really like that. Nice story though. It was a good studio to work in, different from Olympic, which was a big cathedral-like space. The record plant was much smaller, but had an excellent sound. It also had a 12-track and later 16-track facility, as against just 4 at Olympic, which gave Jimmy much more space to work with. Things did get chaotic though, and Chaz got pissed off with the way things were going, partly with Jimmy's attitude, partly with Mike Jeffrey. He just didn't need the aggravation. Jimmy wanted more freedom in the studio and more control, which was fine, but someone should have had more overall control. As much as there were good things that came out of the Electric Ladyland sessions, there was far too much wasted time and energy. It wasn't that I didn't enjoy all of the partying. I did, but it was no way to work. While Noel Redding recalled, "In this climate of mistrust and doubt, referring to the handling of the business by management, we started to record Electric Ladyland at the record plant in New York. Recording technology was moving on, and the tape machines were up to 12-track. We still played well together, although it was difficult to get over the high level of tension which kept us apart, off stage. The approach we had used for Are You Experienced and Bold as Love was still preferred. Work from the format of knowing the basic chords, get a rough tempo, and agree the break positions. After that, we would run through a couple of times to get the feel and get our individual contributions sorted out. With 12 tracks, however, mixing became a bigger part of the process, and Jimmy and Chaz tended to get carried away. Jimmy in particular was entranced by new electronic effects, as well as the possibilities afforded by complicated overdubbing, and the lovely simplicity of our earlier recordings got lost. Instead of just playing the songs through a couple of times and then going to a take, Jimmy began trying to function as a director. This might have worked, but his attempts to verbalize his ideas just didn't. He'd lose his train of thought, skip to something else, fail to convey to us what he was up to. We'd do 4 basic tracks of drums, rough vocals, rhythm guitar and bass, but when it got up to the 36th guitar overdub, it was all system stop. I could nip out to a club and pull a chick, and return only to find Jimmy still hadn't finished tuning his guitar. I told him he was being silly to try and do so much at once, writer, producer, singer, guitarist, arranger, but he took no notice. Things had to be done Jimmy's way or no way, and Jimmy was getting more and more unproductive. Nothing was happening. Or if it was happening, it took so long you didn't know it was happening. As the recording process got stretched out into marathon twiddling sessions, an audience grew in the studio, legions of hangers-on who contributed nothing to the music, but were there solely for the trip. Chaz, who had nurtured the experience from the beginning, was getting fed up. He had successfully produced the first 2 albums, but now found himself stymied by Jimmy's demands for control. It was not only the experience and Chaz, who were exploring new dimensions in frustration, but the record companies as well. It had been 5 months since the previous album, and demand for a new product was heavy. Track Records compiled smash hits, a collection of the singles, to fill the gap, but it was a holding action. In desperation, Chaz put pressure on Jimi to cut down on the studio crowd scenes as well as the drug diet. He risked a lot of bad feeling, but Jimi did promise to shape up, a promise that lasted for as long as it took for a scene maker. There was no shortage to show up with something to smoke, snort, or swallow. Hendrix possessed a grand design for his music, stressing its positive potential to help change society, explains Hendrix author John McDermott. The colourful prose Hendrix invoked to stymie straight journalists fostered a perception that either he was completely out of touch with reality, or perhaps thoroughly manipulated by all his white management. In actuality, the situation was far more intricate. The paucity of black faces at his concerts was distressing, but so were the demands by fans to smash and burn his instrument. Far more sensitive and insightful than his fans ever knew, Hendrix possessed a grand design for his music, stressing its positive potential to help change society. Deeply spiritual, Hendrix felt music could heal and help bring races together. Through interviews, Hendrix, in his own inimitable fashion, expressed concepts such as his preference for performing outdoors, where he felt the music best combated the tension and strife between people of all races. As Chaz Chandler testifies, Hendrix was far from naive, understanding that music and politics were a very tricky mix, where one continually ran the risk of being used and having the message cheapened. The most significant stumbling block that Hendrix faced in trying to cross over to a black audience was that of radio airplay. Virtually ignored by black radio, an absurd term when one considers that most were owned by white corporations, Hendrix was thus locked out from black audiences. In his 1986 autobiography, James Brown wrote, "While there were around 500 black-oriented radio stations in the country, only 5 of them were owned by black people, and 3 of those were mine." With his music deemed too white for black radio and too hard for white AM airplay, Hendrix became a staple of the country's growing staple of FM stations. Though predominantly shunned by radio, Hendrix's fame was a classic combination of talent and hype. His management team controlled the marketing of the artist, while Concerts West, essentially his own touring company, ensured, via their radio advertisements, that the faithful knew his songs. The Hendrix image, the experience one had at his performances, was a savvy sales tool, unique amongst his contemporaries. Ton Hula of Concerts West remembers the impact this self-promotion had on other artists. "We had purchased some Creedence Clearwater Revival dates from the ABC booking. John Fogerty came to me at Vancouver Airport and said, 'I hear you're doing something with Jimi Hendrix. How do you do it? I'm really unhappy with our situation. Hell, we were playing in Fresno last night and the guy didn't even rent a PA.' So from Jimi Hendrix, we ended up with the Creedence Clearwater Revival. I sat down with John and his accountants in Oakland and showed them how our concept worked. There were no rules." Further recalls Hewlett, "I give Hendrix credit for introducing a whole new way of doing business, where the artist made most of the money. The bookies agencies didn't like it, because the time had come when Mike Jeffrey and Steve Weiss no longer needed a booking agent to get to a Tom Hewitt or Phil Basile. All of a sudden, the middleman was cut out, and Hendrix made more money." That concludes this installment of the Electric Ladyland special. Stay tuned for episode 4, where we shall continue the examination of the Electric Ladyland album. Please remember to check the channel's community tab and video information page, where you will find links to the Belly Button shop, including our catalogue of videos, Hendrix merchandise, and links to Jimi's performances and information from the period. Don't forget to subscribe for future content updates. And by the way, if you have any stories or anecdotes to contribute, we would love to hear from you. Until next time.